People ask me, hey, do you ever get nervous public speaking? And almost never at this point, which is good because then I would just live in anxiety because I do it so much. But I would say that today, maybe just a little. Maybe just a little. And you'll understand why as we go. In 1906, there was a man that lived in Ottawa, Canada. Shout out Canada. And this man decided he was going to rob a bank. True story. So yeah, go Canada. That's called a trap. And so he fell on really hard times. He was very desperate, and so he decided to rob this bank. And he looks for a gun. He doesn't own one, but he knows his father who had passed away owned one. And so he kind of sneaks around his drawers and he finds this old Colt revolver and he dusts it off and he takes it to the bank. And he sticks the bank up. Not an actual picture. And he gets $6,000. Now, if you rob a bank in modern times, you're hoping for a little more than 6 G's. But in 1906, that's a lot of money. He pretty much immediately got caught, which happens to most bank robbers. Even if you've seen a lot of bank robbing movies, it's not how they usually go. It's not something that people usually think through. Stick him up. And then the cops got him. They confiscated the money, put him in prison for about 6 years, and they confiscated the gun. What he would later learn is that one of the police recognized that this was kind of a nice gun. And so he took it to get appraised. You know how much the gun was worth? $100,000. Oh my God. Can you imagine how that guy felt? Such an idiot. You know what I mean? And what's the point? In the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about our treasure. And it's so true, especially of Christians, that it's right there in front of us. Yeah. We have this immeasurable treasure in God. And it sounds so churchy to say, but it's like to have eternal life and to give it up to chase money is ludicrous. But we do it for all the reasons we've discussed the previous couple weeks. Don't miss out on true treasure to chase lies or to run from your fear and insecurity. That's been the content of the last 3 weeks. And if this is your first time coming to church today, it's kind of like it's first time going over to somebody's house, and they end up having this like family talk. And you're like, should I be here? No. Chris and I would talk about, we used to go to these staff meetings in Gainesville and years ago, and there was this really awkward dynamic between one of the couples there. And there were times they'd like start talking about their marriage, and we'd be like, I don't know. Do you want me to leave, or and like, just stay and listen and learn? I'm like, okay. If you're visiting today, I'm not saying you won't glean from this. I'm just saying this isn't directed at you. And that's, that sounds foreboding. So they were like, oh, snap. Like, if I'm a member, is it directed at me? It is. But I suppose all lessons are. And wise, humble people can glean from anything in observation. And in some senses, if you join a family and the first day you get an awkward talk, you learn more about that family than any other way it could be. Right. Maybe it's better for it to be messy than super polished. Yeah. Today, the title of the lesson is A Noble Cause. Malachi chapter 3. Just want you to have it open so you have it there. I'm just going to refer to it a little bit. In verses 8 through 10 is the section we're going to be focusing on. The Israelites were not tithing to God, as was mandatory in the Old Testament. Now, we've spoken a lot about first fruits and tithes last week, so refer to that at some point. It's on the website. And God says, you're robbing me. And they say, how do we rob you? And God says, in tithes and offerings, you're under a curse, he says. Pretty strong language. The whole nation of you, because you are robbing me. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. He says, test me in this. See if I do not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have enough room for it. An amazing, perhaps the greatest promise regarding money in the Bible, or at least among them. God claims the Israelites were robbing him. We've talked a lot about the tithe in previous weeks, but I believe this general message is for us as well. I think that when we do not give our wealth, whether we think we're wealthy or not, we not only rob God, we rob ourselves of God's blessing. Which comes in the form of, when you sacrifice your money, what you gain is immeasurably more valuable. Perspective, trust, Your character is shaped by your sacrifice. The message today is the same as it was in ancient times. Here's the thing. Not all charities are created equal. You know, when you talk about giving, whether to church, to a nonprofit, or to a charity, or anything like that, what you'll learn as you study is that giving to charities may all feel the same, but they're not all the same. You know, a couple decades ago, a great idea was brought forth, and the organization would be coined Play Pumps International. The idea was that clean water would be brought to parts of the world, especially extreme poverty-stricken majority world.
That's a tough one.
Wow.
That's a tough one. Didn't even have it written down. You're welcome. The idea was that instead of the villagers having to pump the water, their kids could jump on this merry-go-round that also doubled as a pump. So the idea was the kids just have a blast, and the parents are just like, woo! You know what I mean? Like, it's so easy, you know? I don't know if you've ever pumped water out of a well before. It is insane work. It's hard work. And you don't get a lot for your return. It's not like clicking your fridge button. You know what I mean? Mine's tough, though. You have a hard time finding it. If you've never been to my house, you'd be like, how does this work? You're like, to the left, a little up, 90 degrees, bam, right there. Even harder than that. Such a great idea, right? Celebrities got on board. Millions of dollars were raised. And it totally failed. Complete failure. They didn't field test it enough. So they got a couple out there. First of all, they cost $14,000 each to install, which is an insane amount of money compared to the pump they would put in most places. Exponentially more. I don't know the exact difference, but it's exponential. The pumps didn't work well because they were heavy to push, and the kids were getting sick and injured. So moms and dads were like, let's not do that. But they still had to use this new thing now, so they would have to walk around with it, and it was twice as much work for half the return. Wow. And now there are hundreds of play pumps just sitting in a dumpster somewhere. Wow. Now, if you're one of the people that are like, I gave the play pumps, I thought it was going great. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sorry for you. You know, you probably felt the same. I think it meant the same to God that you gave to that, but it wasn't multiplied the same. And there's this idea of high-impact charity. You know, there's a research organization called Giving What We Can. They've done extensive research on calculating how effective an organization is with making your money go as far as possible. And they have A, B, C charities. Charity A is Play Pumps International, or rather, Charity C. Your money doesn't get you that much return. You give to it, but, you know, think about a charity where the overhead's super high, meaning a large percentage of what you give is taken out to something that you wouldn't want your money going to. That's a Charity C. Charity B is a 10 times impact. That's a good charity. But there are such things as 100 times impact, where you give and it's an exponential amount. And one example is, if you're not familiar, World Vision is a Charity A organization. World Vision's focus is helping children in the most extreme poverty-stricken areas of the world with the most basic necessities. And the reason it's a Charity A is because it connects the giver in a way that's very hard to connect to the receiver. And it works with, it's not a handout, it's development. And so you can sponsor a child for $45 a month, and it sponsors their education from the time they're 2 or 3 till they're 18. And you can put them through school, which they wouldn't normally be able to go to. They'd be able to get a better career. They can then feed their families, help their families as they grow up. Sometimes you can buy the village, like a goat or a cow, or you can help them with getting the Play Pump International out of there. That's not really a thing, but it's 100 times impact. So, why give to church? There are a lot of organizations out there. And I believe that we should give to those organizations. I also believe that we need to be people who give to the church. And there's this strange irony in me telling you this. I recognize that. I want to acknowledge it. I thought a lot about my words in this lesson, obviously. Obviously, I'm talking about giving to an organization that supports me personally financially. And I'm like, give all you can so I can get the new Lambo, you know? Obviously, if you know me, that's absurd. But in case you don't know me, I just want to be clear. This isn't about, lining the minister's pocket. Yeah. Okay, we give more. It's not like, all right, Kyle's going to get the big raise he's been looking for. No minister that you want wants the big raise. Right. Yeah. You know what I mean? When you start, if you go to a church and the minister's just talking about how much he's balling, I might not go to that church anymore. Right? And why give your church? Well, what is church? It's intended to be a type of rehab center. I think that's the best definition I have for you. We all come to church because we're looking for something, and we're in some way broken. We remain broken, but become a little more whole together. Some of us are more whole than others, and we help each other. And we kind of never leave. You know what I mean? It's a rehab center, but we never leave because when we become whole, we just help other people become whole. Which makes church super messy. So the irony of people coming to church and being like, I don't know, someone said something to me that was kind of whack. I'm like, yeah, welcome to church, right? Like, you go to a rehab center, you're like, there's some crazy stuff going on. Be like, where do you think you went? You're like, you went to a rehab center. Like, you're going to have crazy stories. Like, that's going to happen in church too. In fact, in a strange way, it's kind of a sign of health because you have a lot of dysfunctional people. And hopefully dysfunctional people become more functional.
Right. That's right.
But you keep getting more dysfunctional people in the church as the church grows. So there's always that balance, right? That's what church is. When you talk about high-impact organizations, the uniqueness of the church stands alone.
Yes.
Because the goal is not just meeting the material needs, though we do that for one another. We have a benevolent fund where if you're struggling with rent, if you have a hard time paying for food, we will never let you go hungry and not have a place to stay. The church will take care of you. But we're concerned with the soul.
Right.
Now, outside of faith, this is kind of gimmicky, right? But if you believe in Jesus, if you believe the crazy stuff we believe about Jesus, there is no higher impact place to be than a place that meets what is meant to be all those needs on some level, the spiritual, the emotional. Of course, I'm a believer that if you can hit that spiritual need and help people be close to God, it's a trickle-down effect. It brings health to every part of your life, even if you might still need to search for special help in other places. In 1 Corinthians 9, Paul has this really interesting conversation where he kind of hyperlinks back to the Old Testament. He says, it is written in the law, don't muzzle the ox while it's treading the grain. You're like, what is that? Well, when the ox were pounding on the grain to make it fine to be ready to process in the ancient way, they were like, hey, don't put a muzzle on the ox. Let it eat as it does its thing. It's a better investment for you. And he says, is it really? He's like, am I talking about oxen? No. Paul says to the Corinthians, if we have sown spiritual seed among you, is it too much if we reap a material harvest from you? You know, all right, I'll just go there. You're already there. It's really quick. You can remember more. He's talking about the symbiotic relationship that's supposed to exist between a church and a minister. If you don't know what a symbiotic relationship is, it's this idea that, the hippo and the crane, I don't know exactly what that is, they're very different animals, right? They exist differently, they operate differently. It's symbiotic because they like each other and they benefit each other. And that's true. The most famous is probably the clownfish and the coral. The coral is poisonous to almost all living beings, but the clownfish has a special genetic code that allows it to live in it. So it lives in it, it cleans the coral, and the coral protects it. It's a symbiosis. The bottom one isn't, you don't even see the little bird there. You'll see this with sharks. You see a shark cruising, and there's like a giant fish on it, and you're like, that seems like dinner. But it won't eat that, because it needs that. It's symbiosis. I asked 2 weeks ago, what's your generosity dream? I want to share with you mine. Most ministers I know that I respect have the same generosity dream. We all want to be able to do this for free. Like, no one I know that I believe is a good minister is doing it for the money. And if they are, get a different job. And I don't mean that, I feel very taken care of, and I will talk very specifically about that. That's not the point. The point is, I believe it's a calling. A lot of things are callings, but not everything. I never thought of myself as getting paid by the church, though I guess that's true. I've always thought of myself as being supported to do the thing God wants me to do. And that you're providing that for me, I feel very grateful for this church. There's nothing I'd rather do. There's no way I'd rather spend my time. Do I believe I'm the best for the job? No. But I'm what you got. And I often pray that if God doesn't want me here, he would remove me. And he has not done that yet. So I'm just going to keep chugging along. The symbiosis that's meant to exist between a minister or a pastor and the church is really beautiful. And I had a whole section here of explaining to you what I do, but it took forever. And I cut it out. I want to do it very simply. Because I think that what I had the chance to do, what Kristen has the chance to do, what Max and Sabrina do, is the same thing as the Levites and the priests in the Old Testament. We connect people to God, and we connect the people of God to the needs of the world.
Amen.
That is the simplest way I can explain it to you.
Amen.
We spend all of our time doing this. If we're not personally caring for our own walks with God and our families, we're doing this. Church isn't about systems or programs or good Sunday services. It's about people. And we have to invest in one another. You have invested in me so that I can invest in you. That's how it works. It's a beautiful symbiosis. And of course, I'm not like, well, I don't give. I also give. I'm delighted to give to the church. And not because I think it's some weird way benefits me personally. I don't even think about that. I'm just like, is there a charity I want to give more to than the church I'm a part of? Like that, I can almost not imagine that. Although we try to give to others if we can. I want to talk about why stewardship of church funds. We talked about, for the people who love Excel spreadsheets out there, you'll enjoy the next 15 minutes.
Yeah!
I want to have just a really transparent conversation about how this works. Every January we have a corporate meeting, which is like, for a lot of people, like the worst night of their life. But for some of us, we're like, this is what I was born for. And basically what it is we talk about all the church funds. How does it work? How much money is there? Where does it go? How is it managed? This is really important. The church is a nonprofit, which means its budget is public.
Yeah.
You can look at it. If you ever want to see it, talk to me. I'll give it to you. Well, actually, I'll give you the number of the guy who can give it to you. But I will, in a sense, give it to you. And I'm happy. I have nothing to hide. I'm happy for you. Happy even for you to have an opinion on it. That's fine with me. God's money should be stewarded really well. I want to explain to you how it's done in the church.
Come on.
It's confusing because we are Ann Arbor Church, but actually we're the Detroit Church of Christ. I'm going to explain this to you, okay? We're part of a larger umbrella church called the Detroit Church. It's made up of 2 regions, right? 2 campuses. The East is just called the Detroit Church. We're the West, and we're the Ann Arbor Church, okay? The East region is bigger. It's about 160 to 180 members. And the West is about 65. It'll be 65 today. And we, together, we raise money. We give the contribution. We'll explain how to, Chad will actually explain after how to do that. And it goes toward a lot of things. And there are leadership, different staff in each region. So Ann Arbor Church is made up of the Eastmans, which is myself, my wife, and the Plaguers, Max and Sabrina. And the East region is Mark and Ruth King.
Yeah!
That's their son. And Mark and Ruth also oversee the work of all the church along and work directly with the East. They have an amazing job. They're remarkable ministers.
Yeah.
I've interacted with a lot of ministers. They're among the best. We're personally very grateful for them. And we also have a great administrator, Mariko Quist, who helps make sure the money's taken care of well. Okay? So, let me explain. Line grab time.
Yeah.
Buckle up. Okay? Martin's pumped. So basically what you have, too early, no way. So this is the group, we all give, and another part of this is that we have a church board. So everybody gives their money and it goes to a bank, right? And not like a piggy bank, but bigger than that. And it's managed by a board. So people from within the church are elected every year to serve, I think it's like 2 or 3 or 4 year terms, I don't know. And their job is to approve of the budget made by, big word, the ecclesiastical leadership, which is the spiritual leadership of the group, which consists of myself and Kristen, the Kangs, and 2 other great couples in the East, the Faulkners and the Alexanders, okay? We together sit down and we allocate funds where we think God's money is used best. We stretch it as far as we can while still trying to be generous. And then the board looks that over and approves that it's a wise use of money. They don't decide where it goes, but they approve. They're kind of a filter for it. Does that make sense? It's a good thing. There's no trouble with this now, but if you have a rogue minister, boards are supposed to sort of also help keep them in check and keep them smart about the money, right? So, but how do you set a budget? Because if any of you have ever had a part-time job, but you get a different amount of hours every week and it's hourly, setting a budget is it's crazy.
Yeah.
You're like, this week I got $300, next week I got $1,000, and then I got nothing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's how do I budget that? The church operates a little bit like that. Every week we get a different amount of money in for various reasons. It helps the church the most if you have if it's like clockwork, maybe it's coming out on tithely, or it's direct deposit, or you're like faithful, I'm going to send that check every week, because then it's the higher the number of people do that, the more you know exactly what it's going to be. There's a lot of variance. One week, 14,000 may be in, and one week it may be like 6. And you're like, what happened that week? But you can't be reactive to that. What you do is the board finds the trends and then averages it out. Does that make sense? Yeah. And that becomes sort of our budget. So last year, our budget was $13.3 thousand a week, which equals about $691,000. And then we gave an extra $60 from our special. So the whole pot was $750,000 to meet all the felt needs of the congregation. And that seems like a lot of money, and it is. But I will tell you, go to your local mega church and look at their budget. It's like game time, baby. You're like, 750 kind of low. You know what I mean? It's like 20 million. You're like, how much staff do you have? A lot. And good for them. 13.3 was what we would need to, on average, collect every week to hit all of our needs. Last year, we collected 12.2, so we were under, right? And that may seem like a lot. You know, you can do a lot of, if you have a budget and you keep to it, you can get pretty flexible with that budget if you need to. You're like, I guess I don't need to do that. Things that you're like, I'll never give it up. You're like, I won't eat if I don't, so I will give it up. The church board does this week to week. Does this make sense so far?
Yes.
So I want to give you, this is where the money goes. Right? Every minister is like really squeamish about this pie chart. You're like, what do you think I make? You know, I'm going to explain some of this for you to help you understand. Okay? So church budget, $750,000 is the hoped for amount we can make to meet all the needs of the congregation. 58% go to salaries of those 4 couples and the 1 administrator. 14% goes to benefits and retirement so that one day I can do it for free. That's my hope, right? For insurance purposes, to take my daughter to the hospital and to myself go. I'm amazed how much my kids go to the hospital. Thank you, church, for helping me with that. Professional reimbursements, man, if you're in the ministry, you buy a lot for the church. The food doesn't just miraculously appear. Somebody picks up that bill, right? The church does. Facility rental, miscellaneous, all kinds of stuff. To simplify it, 72% of the money that you give is invested in the church, and that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
The higher that number is, the better. Because you want your money, and it's an investment. You have to think about it like that. You invest in people, and the people invest in you. It's a symbiosis. If you ever see a church budget, and it's reversed, I don't think that's healthy.
Yeah.
And under only extreme circumstances would I say that that's not strange to me. You know, I want to hit kind of an interesting topic that I thought, I'm going to say this, so I'll say it. You know, ministers' salaries are an interesting thing. I've actually never heard this talked about in church before. Maybe there's a reason. Maybe I'll figure it out in 5 minutes. They're decided by the core leadership team of the board. Now, I'm not a part of the decision of my own salary, which I think is probably appropriate to some degree. No minister gets into it for the money. I know I've said that before. Or at least no minister that's worth their salt, in my opinion.
Yes.
You don't want someone who's hankering for a big check to get the ministry. And honestly, I'd be like, I'd probably do something else. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, I don't know if that's a trajectory where you're going to get most wealthy, though I do feel very taken care of. And while you don't want, no one wants their minister to make a ton of money. Like, if I pulled up in my Lamborghini, you'd be like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, how I feel about that. Like, it depends how many rides I get you, I guess. You'd be like, if I was as generous as Mike's friend, you'd be like, this is great. Right? You kind of want your minister to have, like faded pant. You know what I mean? Yeah, I feel like that's a good thing. You want to take care of a minister, obviously, though, because I've seen the opposite. I've seen boards and ecclesiastical leadership be stingy with their ministers. And what happens when ministers not making enough? Well, there's stress.
Yes.
Now, I think that just like all of us, I am obligated by God to be a good steward of the funds that I'm blessed with. And I asked Mark and Ruth to look over our budget partially for that reason. But I think it's important that we also, you don't want your minister to be struggling.
Yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of ministers have to get second jobs. And I think a lot of ministers are willing to do that, but what's the problem? Well, your investment is halved then.
Yes.
Because you have less to give. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have to find the middle ground where you're able to give, the board and the leadership decides on giving enough to be, you want to be generous, but you also want to be thoughtful about stretching the money as far as it can go. You know what I'm saying? If if Kyle and Kristen are paid double, guess who can't serve? Max Sabrina. And guess what happens? Our ministry campus isn't as awesome as it is. So you want to stretch that money while still being, do you understand the kind of the give and take there? If you ever have questions about salary, you can just come talk to me. Like, I'll tell you. Like, I'm not weird about that. Like, I'm like, yeah, I don't know why people are so weird about that kind of stuff. Like, just come talk to me. I'll answer, like, any question you have. Like, how much money did you spend on those shoes? Happy to tell you. Birthday money. Totally worth it. I just want you to know. There are 3 stages in a church financial life. There's the drowning stage. This is not a good place to be, as drowning is never a good place to be. When panic sets in, that's when your income is under your expenses by enough to have to make significant changes and cuts. Make sense? There's the swimming stage. This is really where you want to live because it means you're using your funds well. This is when your income basically matches your expense. It's never going to be exact because, remember, the budget's kind of wild. But if it's managed well, which Detroit Church money is managed very well, there are great people managing it, you're going to be close. And that's what you want. Because then you're maximizing the money that God's people are giving. Does that make sense? The investment's being met to its full. But then there's the thriving stage. This is every minister's dream. Someone win the lottery and drop in 50 mil. You know what I mean? Just give me a tithe, you know? And I'm being dramatic, obviously, but the thriving is when you overgive. This happens in the Old Testament. There was a time in Moses' time where Moses is like, hey guys, stop bringing me stuff. I have too much. Now, I've never seen a church say that. But it's the stage where you start to dream and get creative. Right? When the church gives so much that you're like, wow, we have more than we need to meet our needs. What can we do with this? What does God want us to do with this? That's an exciting place to live as a church. When your income overs your expenses. This is kind of the part of the conversation I want to be super honest with where our church is at. Okay? The last 2 years we've been in the drowning stage, unfortunately. And I want to explain that. What does that mean? You know, it's interesting because Ann Arbor Church is thriving right now. Like, I'm so excited about where our church is. I'm pumped. Like, I go to bed pumped. I wake up slightly less pumped because it's early, but I'm still excited about the church. Guys, if you don't have context for it, our church the last 2 years has, on average, had in the mid-50s people. We've had 27 baptisms. Now, if you haven't been around the church long, you're like, okay, great, but you have to understand the way we study the Bible with people, our expectations for the standard of discipleship are quite a bit higher than most places I know of. Adding membership is a harder deal, and I'm amazed by what I feel like God's doing. Sydney will be the 15th baptism we've had this year. I don't know, Chad, the numbers guy, he has numbers going back to like the beginning of time when he was born. But the old man joke, even though you're not that old, classic. This is the most baptisms the West experienced in a very long time. I know that people keep telling me it. And I feel like that's because we got a great thing going on here. I feel like God is doing something really special. I want to be a part of it. And yet, at the same time, we're struggling financially. This is exactly how much. We're $100,000 under what we need to meet our expenses. That's a lot of cheddar. Now, for those of you that are in college, you're like, that's a lot. You know what I mean? You're like, yeah. And it may not be as much as you think because you can make a lot of cuts. And I just want you to know, the board and the leadership has been really, the budget's trimmed, right? And you could trim it more, but when you get up to those 6-figure numbers under, you have to start thinking about what's realistic moving forward to steward God's money well. I just want to share with you, if nothing changes, and before I talk about that, the following is not about guilt or fear. That would be a horrible thing for me to do. I have no interest in doing it. I don't want people to feel guilty or fearful. God's very faithful. Money is nothing to him. I do think that he very intentionally makes it so that we're a part of that victory, though. You know, if nothing changes, here are the 2 most realistic consequences. Consequence number 1 is that Mark and Ruth King have to move away. Now, for those of you that haven't been around the church long, you're like, if I've never even seen them, great, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's fine. Mark spoke the other day. Well, I'm like, we'll still have Eastman, we don't need him, you know? It's kind of one of those things that, like, how it would affect us a great deal. It would affect the church a great deal. Losing their wisdom and their foresight and their vision and their faith would be a blow. And it would mean that Chris and I would take over leadership of the entire Detroit church. Now you'd be like, what do we need to do to raise the money then? Because you're going to, drag this thing around. I think Chris and I are capable of that. Not with the false confidence. I think we're surrounded by amazing people. But what it would do to our time, we would become severely limited in what we could give to Ann Arbor. Yeah. And we're very blessed. I don't know if you noticed, but Ann Arbor is disproportionately staffed.
Yes.
I don't think the West has ever had 2 staff counselors before. Nope. And part of the benefit of this is with the investment comes a return. I think it's part of the reason there's good growth. And again, it's not like because I'm crushing it. Like it's not that. It's that we're able to give in a way it's never been happening. And it's beautiful. Yeah. But you will lose that feel. That's option number 1 if nothing changes. Option number 2, and I'm thoughtful about how this sounds. I just want to be honest with you. I called Mark some weeks ago and I just said, hey Mark, I just want you to know if nothing changes by like April, May next year, Chris and I are willing to step aside, get another job, and just keep trying to lead the church. Now, I know that sounds like, you're so great. Like, I don't mean it to, you know what I'm saying? I don't mean it to sound like that. I legitimately would do that and would be delighted. It would be pretty tough. Yes. We have 3 children. One of them is always with us. Noelle, she's a sweet thing, but that would stretch us and it would severely limit our capacity to serve. There are a lot of places that do it, and perhaps that's God's vision. The odds of that happening are low because Mark shot it down immediately. But those are the 2 things that are really on the table to make up that deficit. Does that make sense? Yeah. That's what's realistic. If the number was like 30, you could kind of make that work. Like you could trim more, you could, whatever. But at the 100, it's high. All right. So I asked Sean, we're going to kind of, the landing gear is coming out. I'm trying to be quick, but there's a lot to be said. We're getting there. There are 194 giving units in our church. And a giving unit is like, myself and Kristen are one giving unit. Make sense? And if you're single, you're not married, you're one giving unit. And so there's 260 members of the church, but 194 giving units. Make sense? I asked for an evaluation. I don't want to know what you guys give. I don't think it's wrong for a minister to have that information. I just would prefer not to have it. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I just don't want, sometimes you just don't tell me. Like, I don't want to know. Yeah. I don't want to know. Because it doesn't change the way I would minister to you or try to love you. But I think it's okay if I did. But I just choose not to. So I asked Sean Alexander, our treasurer, said, can you run an evaluation of what percentage of our church gives generously and regularly, as much as you know, gives sporadically, or does not give at all? Because this would at least tell me, well, if people are not giving at all, maybe this deficit isn't so terrifying. But if 90% of church is giving generously, then I'm like, well, then we just need to make a staffing change. Because everybody's giving. And here's what came up. 22% of the 194 units give above and beyond. And I will tell you, that 20-ish% supports probably 70 to 80% of the whole budget. Wow. It's a really big number. You know the 20-80 principle? 20% to 80% of the work. Financially, that's sort of true in our church. About 25% tithe, which I think is generous and great. 16% give sporadically or very little, and a whopping 37% give $0 to the church. That is a whopping number. Wow. It's big. Now, I asked specifically you're like, well, maybe that's mostly the East region, So I was like, give me the numbers on the West. So here's the West. So I don't have to go over it, right? 62% of us in the room that are members of the church do not give at all or sporadically give. Now, there's a couple things I could say now. The first thing I'll say is that we have a lot of new Christians in this church, right? Some of this, I believe, is actually a failure of teaching. I totally feel like I can do a better job in teaching and inspiring giving, hence our 4-part series on treasure. And I think it's important, too, that while all these lessons have led to this moment, I believe chronologically it's been in order of importance. Mm-hmm. I don't think we should give because there's consequences if we don't. Yeah. To the church. There's consequences to you if you don't give. Yeah. Your heart, your sacrifice. If you don't give anything, if there's no skin in the game at all for you, what does that say about you or your character? It says something. I can't tell you exactly what it says. It says something. It's hard for me to measure from this spot. The goal, of course, is not just to have the givers give more, though that will inevitably happen. I think the hope would be that we'd all be a part of the investment, myself included. And what I want to do at the end here is I just want to give you cold, hard math.
Come on, math.
$100,000 feels like a lot. It's not as much as you think with the power of exponential giving. Basically, what we would need is $2,000 more a week giving to hit that goal, right? 2,000 plus 52, ooh, that's not right, times 52.
Nice.
It's about that six-figure number. There's a bunch of ways to get there. I want to encourage you with it as we close, okay? And so I was saying is that to start swimming, to go from drowning to swimming, 2K more a week. Make sense? Yep. If you made $15,000 a year, which is the poverty line in America for single-family households, okay? A tithe of a poverty line would be $30 a week. That's if you gave 10% of a fairly low, very low salary. Let's say you can't give that. Let's say just craziness in your life. You're supporting 5 family members. You got this. And God bless you if that's what you're doing. And God knows, God knows your situation. And He sees it. And give at your means. Do not overgive. Don't you dare go into debt for the church. That's not godly. That's a bad stewardship of your fund. That's not what anybody's asking you to do. A third of a tithe of the poverty line is $10 a week. If every giving unit of the church, 194 of us, gave just $10 more a week, it would solve our problem. Wow. $93,000 a year. So if you're ever like, I don't know if it matters. Maybe it does, you know what I mean? Like, but maybe it does, 10 more a week. Let's keep doing a little bit of math, okay? Just to encourage you. Every campus student. Hey. We're campus heavy in this room. I remember when I was in campus, I was like, I give by moving chairs. You know what I mean? I give my sweat, And you do give your sweat. But we should start tithing on the lowest amount that we have. Yes. When you do it with a little, you'll do it with a lot. If every student gave $20 a week, just so you know, $20 a week is a tithe of a part-time minimum wage job. If you make minimum wage and you work 20 hours, $20 is a tithe of that. Now you may be like, are you sure? You can do the math, that's fine. That would be $22,000 more. That's a fourth of our deficit. Wow. If just like 21 people gave that. Let's get bigger though.
Come on, bro. If
just the 73 giving units that give zero, gave $20 a week, $76,000. Wow. Let's go a little bigger. What if 50 people gave $50 more a week? That would be a tithe on a salary of $26,000. That's not that much for most people out of college that have a job. Even for a lot of people in college. Like, that's not inconceivable. Like, I'm not like you have to be making $200,000 to make. Like, isn't it kind of surprising how much you can give? Like, I was surprised. Like, $50 a week. Like, that's a lot. If 50 people did this, it'd be $130,000. Wow. We're swimming, baby. You know what I mean? We might be thriving. We're leaping, What's the point? Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much.
That's right.
The last thing I want you to do as we close is to walk out of here and be like, Kyle told me to give more, so I'm giving more, Like that. Like, I think God is calling us to be generous. Yes. And I'm trying to inspire you that sometimes we can think like, well, I don't think the church needs my funds. I just want to give you the reality. The church is going to be fine. No matter what happens. Like, God is so much bigger than people, than money. He can do it however He wants. I think He wants to use us, though. Yes. Because I think if we do it, the evolution of character is far greater than if a rich person drops the money we need. Right. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah. It's better if a lot of people give a little than a few people give a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
Because of what it does for us. I love this church. I don't want anything to change. Like, I'm super happy here. I would be happy to be here until I die, which hopefully is way long time away. I want that very badly. Whatever God does, I'm on for the ride. I'd like the ride to not end when it didn't have to end, I guess is what I'm saying. In this way, for all of us. Think about the bank robber, right? Really think about, okay, like, if I'm not giving, or I'm giving sporadically or not at all, why might that be? And what do you need to do? And I just want to encourage you to really think about that. And I don't want you to make an impulsive decision. I think we should talk to people about our giving, a few trusted people, and just have a conversation. What are you able to do? And then let's just do it together, amen?
Amen.
That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say a prayer that you still like me. And Chad's going to come up and clean up the mess that I've left behind.
Yes.
And he'll also describe just kind of the nuts and bolts. If you are like, okay, I'm in, like I'm there, you're just going to describe how to do that and give a couple announcements, and then we'll get to enjoy an awesome baptism.
Yeah.
Let's pray together.